笹川平和財団の方で今回このような企画をさせていただいたのは、皆さんにピースメディエーションサポートっていうのは何なのかっていうのをぜひ知っていただきたくて、このような活動をたくさん長くしてるんですけれども、その内容について世界の人たちがどんなことをしているのかっていうのを知っていただきたくて、このイベントを開催しました。で、今日は先ほどうちの理事長がお伝えしましたけれども、前の方に座っているのは皆さん世界各国でメディエーションサポートというのをやっている人たちが世界各国で本当にやってらっしゃるんですけど、そういう方たちが今回ちょうど総会があって皆さん来ているということになります。で、今日の今回の総会の主催が笹川平和財団とバードオフファンデーション、バードオフ財団というドイツにある財団、そしてイギリスにベースがあるコンシリエーションリソースというこの3つの団体がOK Good なので3つの団体が共催で実は今回MSN メディエーションサポートネットワークというグローバルなネットワークの総会を今年日本でやることになりまして、その共催の3つの団体が皆さんここにいらっしゃる方を代表してメディエーションサポートとは何かという話をしたいなと思っております。よろしくお願いいたします。そしてこちらの方に向こう側にいるのはですね、メディエーションサポートを受けたことのある人たちということで、笹川平和財団、そしてコンシレーションリソーシス、バーゴフ財団が様々な形で支援をしていた、バスクですね、スペインのバスク、そして、タイの南部の紛争で関わっている人たちというのを、来ていただいて、今日お話を聞きたいなと思っております。よろしくお願いいたします。で、やっぱり日本って、実は平和構築、たくさんやってるんですけれども、ほとんどが、ポストコンフリクト。なので、紛争終わった後のインフラストラクチャーを作ったりですね。復興をやったり、開発ですね。っていうのがほとんどの平和構築の支援となっていますけれども、今日来てらっしゃる人たちっていうのは、紛争中から入っていてですね。いわゆるテロリストというふうに政府は呼ぶかもしれない、そういった武装勢力の人たちともエンゲージしながら、関係を持ちながら、対話によって政治的な方法で問題を解決しようという形で活動している人たちがメディエーションサポートをやっているということで話をしています。なので今日はメディエーションサポートとは何ぞやっていう話をまずは、イギリスのコンシリエーションリソーシスの代表をしているジョナさんからお話を聞きたいなと思っております。で、ジョナさんと笹川平和財団は実はですね、コンシリエーションリソーシスと笹川平和財団はもう9年ぐらいにわたって一緒に活動しておりまして、特に我々が活動していることをパブリケーション、アコードという名前のパブリケーションを作るのでずっと一緒に連携してきた経緯がございます。それではまずはジョナさんの方から CR の活動とともにですね、ピースメディエーションとは何かという話をしていただけたらなと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
Thanks a lot, Akiko, and it's a pleasure to be here and see many friends from the Mediation Support Network in the front, and to have the opportunity to speak to colleagues from Japan. Mediation Support Network was founded some 15 years ago, and one of the critical premises was that when you are faced with violent conflicts, it can be very difficult for the parties in conflict with one another to actually speak directly to one another. And so you need to find ways to support them to do so, and to think at what point in the conflict that will work, and how you can create the spaces and opportunities for engagement. Many people will be familiar with the roles that the United Nations plays in trying to be a mediator, or that sometimes groups of states, a contact group, you might be familiar with terms like the Troika, or that represents different states coming together. And there are some individual states that have traditionally played a role in supporting mediation. So for instance, you might be familiar with the role that Norway played in Sri Lanka, or Switzerland has played in a number of different places. What's interesting in recent years is that other governments have started to play more of a role. And we sometimes talk about emerging mediators like Qatar, Turkey, even China has played a role in mediating some contexts. Our group of organizations who are gathering in Tokyo this week are non-governmental organizations. And over the last 2 decades, perhaps a little bit longer, there's been a trend for non-governmental organizations to play more of a role in trying to support parties in conflict to come together to find peaceful solutions to those conflicts. And one of the underlying objectives of the work of organizations like our own is to think, how do you work with those parties to conflicts to move from violence to politics as a way to move out of conflict, so that conflict isn't just resolved through violence, but actually through political processes, with the objective being, how do you find political settlements that can actually survive and that can be sustained? And that's one of the big objectives of the work that we do. Often we hear people talk about the importance of signing peace agreements. In fact, in recent years, there have been few examples of the big peace agreements that might have been signed in the recent past. So many of you will know of the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement that was signed in relation to Northern Ireland in 1998. You might have heard of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement that was signed in the Philippines in 2014 between the government and Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Or you might be familiar with the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in Colombia from 2016 between the government and the FARC movement. But in fact, there are fewer and fewer big peace agreements, and there are more and more small-scale agreements in much more fragmented violent conflicts. But even those can be very difficult to achieve. And so one of the things that our community of actors tries to focus on is that while peace agreements can be critically important, they're never sufficient to actually generate peace. And we spend a lot of time thinking what else needs to be done to make peace viable and to make peace sustainable. And not just to see peace agreements signed, but how do you actually implement agreements? How do you continue working with communities through the ups and downs of reaching agreements? Because what we observe in the world of conflict and the real world out there is that there's very rarely one moment that signifies the end of a conflict. That the conflict will recur, and many conflicts reach agreements and then fall back into violence. So the challenge is how to sustain this. Conciliation Resources is one member of the Mediation Support Network, and our work is very much focused on long-term engagement in zones of conflict, trying to work in partnership with the people who are affected by the violence, and to support them to find ways out of conflict. We're very aware that the people who are often most affected by violent conflict often have tremendous insight about what can be done to solve the conflict, but very often have the fewest resources to actually make a difference. And so organizations like ours try to work alongside affected people and work alongside affected communities and local organizations to support them to determine what can be done to change their experience of violent conflict. Essential to that work is the ability to listen to people, to undertake joint analysis with them, to understand what causes the conflict and what opportunities there are to solve problems, and how do you create dialogue between conflicting parties, between groups that are in conflict with one another. It's not easy, and I just want to mention 3 examples very briefly of places where we've worked, but amongst our group, I think we've probably worked in all continents and many of the conflicts that you will be familiar with around the world if you read the newspapers. And there are different types of engagements in different types of conflict and at different moments in the cycle of a conflict. I just want to mention 3 where we've played a role that I think is quite innovative and quite important. One, in Ethiopia. For 6 years, we helped to facilitate talks between the government of Ethiopia and an armed liberation movement called the Ogaden National Liberation Front. And in that 6-year period, we supported talks between the parties, but actually there were only 3 rounds of talks. Most of the effort was working separately with the government, which was done by a group of Kenyan politicians, and with the armed group, which we did, to help them rethink what the opportunities were, to rethink the constitutional options. And after 6 years of work, we were able to support them to reach a peace agreement. In the Philippines, we were part of a group called the International Contact Group, which comprised 4 states, including Japan, United Kingdom, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, and 4 NGOs. And for 4 years, 5 years, we accompanied talks that were facilitated by a Malaysian government official who acted as a facilitator. And that led to the signing of a peace agreement that has sustained until this day. Lots of ideas, arguments between the parties going backwards and forwards. This was at the political level. One of the critical challenges is how do you bring perspectives from the wider society into that process so that it's not just the preserve of political elites, because political elites are often most concerned about staying in power. So how do you challenge that so that this wider society and the needs and perspectives beyond the elites can inform what a peace agreement will look like? Another context where we've worked for a long time, which presents a very different example, is Kashmir. Kashmir is a conflict that rumbles along, is not heard of very often, and it's very difficult to work there. India and Pakistan are very reluctant to see people from outside support communities in context, but we've been able to work on a series of what are called confidence building measures to support people to engage in dialogue across what's called the line of control, the dividing line between Indian administered Kashmir and Pakistan administered Kashmir. And the confidence building measures have been about concrete issues such as how do you create opportunities for trade across the line of control? How do you help people discuss the management of water resources? Or how do you help people work together on issues like disaster management? Because there are lots of earthquakes and floods in that area. I mention Kashmir because this is a situation where we haven't seen a peace agreement and we're unlikely to see a peace agreement. But you can see the improvement in people's lives by the ability for them to work together across the conflict divide. And I think this is one of the key aspirations of mediation support, is how do you help people take part in their own processes and how do you help them find inspiration for a better future? And I want to share very quickly a few key lessons from this work and from the experience we have. First of all, peace isn't easy. Compromise is very difficult. And yet compromise is one of the critical components of any peace agreement. Either you get a military victory for one or other side, or the parties in a conflict have to agree that they can't have everything they want, but they might be able to find a mutually acceptable set of solutions. And that's what compromise is all about. But compromise is often something parties are very reluctant to move towards. Secondly, how do you work to bridge the divides which have become very deep as a result of violent conflict? When people in your community are killed through violence, it makes you very reluctant to engage constructively with people from your perceived enemy. So one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is trying to think through how do you reconcile parties in a conflict? And a couple of things that we've observed is that many conflicts in the world are unequal. You have asymmetric power balances between bigger parties and smaller parties. And trying to create conditions for respect and dignity for all the people involved in a conflict can be very difficult. But it's critical that you search for ways to do this. And one of the things we've observed, which can be very difficult, is to see how the stronger parties in conflict can be more generous in the way in which they engage with the weaker parties. And how do you change the balance in a conflict? This can often be influenced by what we call comparative learning. It's really important that people in conflicts are able to learn from the experience of other conflicts. Each conflict in its own right is unique. And it's very difficult to think that you can use a model from one place and that will help solve the conflict in another place. But people can be inspired by what they see people in other conflict regions having done to bring about peace. And then finally, I'd say that something that's really critical for us to understand is that trying to prevent conflicts is fantastic value for money. It's much cheaper to invest money in peace building than to invest money in military hardware that is often used once conflicts can't be solved. The work we did in Ethiopia over 6 years cost less than the price of half a tank, and yet it brought to the end a 25-year civil war. So if you can invest money in that way, you will have a much greater dividend for peace. And one of the questions for us in being here in Japan is to think about what Japan's role in this is. In recent years, Japan has increased its security and military ambitions. But is Japan going to be able to increase its peace-building commitment to balance that increased role in security and military? And I think that's a really important question for us to discuss.
ありがとうございます、ジョナさん。時間も限られた中で、たくさんのエッセンスについて、メディエーションサポートのエッセンスについて話していただけたらかなと思います。で、次に、バーゴフファンデーションのラクシーさんにお話を聞きたいと思います。バーゴフファンデーションも我々笹川平和財団、長く特にタイ南部の方で一緒に連携して仕事をしてきた、仲間でございます。それではラクシーさんお願いします。
Yeah, thank you, Akiko, and thanks a lot also for inviting us. And it's a great pleasure for us to collaborate with Sasakawa and CR on this year's annual MSN meeting on self-determination. Just to perhaps add a couple of points to what Jonathan was saying in terms of why mediation support is needed and why it is so important. Jonathan mentioned why states are involved now in mediation, but one of the reasons why also the mediation support community has increased over the years is because we don't have this type of mediation anymore of this one charismatic leader like the Kofi Annans and Lakhdar Brahimi's leading a mediation process, right? Mediation has, or conflicts have become very complex. There are multiple actors now, the proliferation of armed actors, geopolitics playing increasingly a role in all conflicts. So to understand how to deal with the complexities, it's not easy for a mediation team, right? So you need support, you need to strengthen these mediation processes, and that's where we all come in, whether in terms of providing mediation research, so support for conflict analysis, or debrief of mediators, also to do scenario analysis, to say, you know, what if situation changes from A to Z, how should the mediation process be set up, how to deal with deadlocks in a process, which all conflict, all mediation processes enter and at one point also into deadlocks. So how do you deal with deadlocks? So all this is just to say that we do the service of strengthening mediation processes, and perhaps just also to illustrate from, you know, what this means from the experience also of Berkhof. I'm not going to go into much details of that. Berkhof is one of the oldest and the largest mediation NGO in Germany. So I'm not going to talk about the years of experience of Berkhof, but perhaps just 1-2 examples, and also one example where Japan was involved in. That's the Sri Lankan peace process from 2002 to 2006. Japan was actually providing mediation support as the co-chair of the donors, so along with Norway and with the US and the European Union, Japan was providing aid for reconstruction, and this was tied though to the progress in the peace process. And we were supporting the Norwegians in all activities, what the Norwegians couldn't do themselves, because otherwise they might compromise their impartiality. So we, for instance, worked very intensively with the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, so the armed movement. Then providing capacity building on a number of issues, particularly on federalism. So we accompanied them throughout Europe to build their capacities on federalism so that they understand the type of compromise that Jonathan was saying. The LTT was for a separate state. The Sri Lankan state was for the unitary state. So, the international community at that time thought compromise could be federalism. And so we did a number of workshops with the LTT, but also with the state actors, constitution committees, on learning about federal structures and federal systems. We also provided support to the Muslim Peace Secretariat. So one of the problems in the Sri Lankan peace process was that it was understood as a binary conflict, one between the Sri Lankan state and the Tamils. But there were also other minorities such as the Muslims. And so we supported the inclusion of the process via supporting the Peace Secretariat, the Muslim Peace Secretariat, and a number of track 2 dialogues, track 1.5 dialogues. These are dialogues where you bring the relevant people, the ones who are at the end of the day also who take decisions, in a room out of the limelight where they can actually test ideas, explore options, where they can also engage with the other party in a more kind of neutral ground, to see whether there are any options to take the peace process forward. So quiet space. And these are the quiet spaces actually we provide in a number of other contexts as well. One other example, if I may, Akiko, just also to mention, is what Gorka will be mentioning soon, but Berkhoff has been also involved in providing negotiation support to a number of armed resistant movements. This was also one of the lessons learned from our Sri Lankan engagement in the Sri Lankan peace process, where we realized that if the LTT would have had more opportunities for learning and sustained support in negotiations, strategy support in negotiations, they might have perhaps considered political options than going back to war. I mean, there were many other factors, obviously, which contributed to the escalation of the conflict in Sri Lanka. But one reason we do think that, they were not really exposed to different options. And so learning from that experience in 2006, we established a network for a negotiation network for resistance and liberation movements. These are armed movements, some of them listed, prescribed, who have no other ways really to engage with the international community or to get exposure into contemporary practice in a negotiation. And currently we have around 9 groups. We provide both tailor-made training for these groups, so in their individual context, but also peer-to-peer learning, which also Jonathan mentioned. So others who have actually already undergone a transition process like the Sinn Féin or ANC, also having interactions with the movements who are yet to enter into a transition process. It's very valuable because these are peers, and usually you learn from peers than third-party actors like us. And this has been ongoing. It's one of our oldest projects at Berkhoff. And it's based on demand. If there was no request or interest in this, we would have most probably also terminated the project. But because there is still growing interest in this network, out of which we then supported the Basque peace process, and Gorka will go more into detail as to what it is.
ラクシーさん、ありがとうございます。今のお話を聞いてもわかると思うんですけど、国家ができることと、 あと国連ができること、そして NGO ができることって違うと思うんですね。で、今回来たのは国連の人も MSN のメンバーではあるんですけれども、多くが NGO の人たちです。で、つまり政府ではできないことをやはり NGO がやるという、そういうことで平和のための活動をコラボレーションしながら、政府と連携しながらやっているっていうのが非常に重要かなと思いますので、残念ながら日本では NGO っていうと、なかなかそのプロフェッショナル集団というふうに見られていない、ボランティアをしている団体だっていう形で、いいことはしてるんだけどという、その専門家集団というイメージがなかなか根付いていない。で、しかしながら他の国では、やはり専門家集団として、平和のためにこのようにいろいろな活動、複雑な、問題に対してアプローチしているということが分かったんじゃないかなと思います。で、次にですね、ゴルカさん、スペインの今上院議員をされていますが、ずっとバスクの政治運動をされてきた方です。で、日本でバスクっていうと美食の街ですとか、バスクチーズケーキみたいなイメージが、皆さんあると思いますけれども、本当につい最近までは、エタと呼ばれる、テロリストですね、がいてですね、ずっとその政治闘争をしていたと。そういうような地域で、ようやく平和になって、こうやって我々、美食の街に行けるようになったわけですけれども、そのバスクでずっと活動されてきた、そして今は上院議員をされているゴルカさんに、どういった、ピースメディエーションサポートっていうのを、受けてきたのかっていう、そして、それのインパクトはどうだったのかっていうお話をしていただけたらなと思います。それではよろしくお願いします。
Thank you, Akiko. Yeah, I like to say that I am a Basque senator in Spain, in that order. It's important to us. So let me first thank the Mediation Support Network, all the members, and especially Sasakawa, Berhoff, and Conciliation Resources for inviting me and letting me be here today. I'm a political activist. I'm a member of a national liberation movement, so I don't belong to the peace-building community. And yet I have some mixed feelings because on the one side, I feel an outsider in this room, but on the other, I also feel part of this family because I have, for over the years, cooperated with many of you on the Basque peace process and later elsewhere as well. Let me first say that today it's a special day for us. Later we might even celebrate it because yesterday we had elections in the Basque country and we got the best electoral results ever in our history. 32% of the votes and 27 MPs out of 75. And this is relevant to what we are speaking today because only a decade ago, we were banned. We could not run for elections. And the decisions we took then have brought us here. But the path was not brightened. And I can assure you that we couldn't have taken those decisions without the help of many of you in this room and others. And trust me, this for us, it is just the beginning. The best is yet to come because I did not embark in this journey just to win some elections. That's very important. But for us, the important work is to continue to work for a free and just Basque country. And I believe that at the end of the day, this is what conflict resolution means for many of us, for national liberation movements. An alternative path, an alternative and realistic path, a democratic, peaceful path that we can follow and that we can use in order to gain our political goals. And this, of course, it means transitioning our movements. It means having to evolve politically, culturally, efficiently, as well, structurally, to become a different movement and trying to keep the values, trying to keep the goals, but to do it by different means, by peaceful, democratic, electoral, political, mass movement means. So when we speak about conflict resolution, and I think that Jonathan drew it very clearly, we're not just speaking about stopping the violence, signing the peace agreements, and making the photos. We're speaking about a much more complex process. And as a national liberation movement, I can tell you that we, as other organizations, we are conservative. We don't like changes. We fear changes. And many times, most of the times I will say, these kind of processes, they bring to the limit our internal cohesion. And that we have to do them under enormous, great internal and external pressures. So they're not easy for us. In our case, and I repeat, in our case, we couldn't have done it without the help of many NGOs that help us do this path towards a different past country, towards also a different movement. NGOs like HD, Conciliation Resources, Berghoff, and many others. Without them, we couldn't have done it. And I can assure you that this cooperation was not always easy. It was not easy for you guys to engage with us back on the day. They were labels, they were, it was not easy. Let me just leave it there. And it was not easy also because sometimes I think I have the feeling that we all take for granted that we all know who is who in the peace building community, who does what. I remember, and I say this in a very personal way, we speak different languages. We come from different backgrounds. We don't understand your language. When you say track 1, track 2, track 3, and we are Googling what's track 1, what are they speaking about? So it's not easy. And I can say that though we have had a very good experience, also the cooperation among your organizations is not always the best, let me say it. So I think that this kind of meetings, they are great in order to encourage and provide such coordination. I will finish my presentation because I was told I had only 6-7 minutes. And we have been trained to say important things in very few minutes, and also to speak for hours without saying anything. But I'll try to finish by just saying that, and I want to end underlining it, that the role that national liberation movements play in such resolution processes. And sometimes I have the feeling that we are not considered part of this ecosystem, that we are left outside of this system, unless it is our own process. If it is the Basque Peace process, then everybody wants to be with us if the process goes well. But I have the feeling that, or at least in our case, experience tell us that I've said it, we couldn't have done it without your help. But for us, the help, the advice, the support of other national liberation movements throughout the path towards peace, it was of great value. We had constant meetings with Sinn Féin, with the ANC from South Africa, with others. And their experience, their language was very similar to ours. We could understand each other in seconds. So I think national liberation movements have a role to play. And Laxi was saying, we have had this wonderful experience on the Resistance and Liberation Movement Network, where for over the years, we have been meeting privately, discussing. We've been trained, it's true, but we have also had the possibility to discuss among ourselves, share experiences, establish bilateral relations, etc. I mean, I think national liberation movements should play a greater role in this question. Thank you.
ゴルカさんありがとうございます。まさにですね、 笹川平和財団、タイ南部で活動をもう10年以上続けているんですけれども、去年ちょうどそのタイ南部で武装勢力とタイ政府が戦っているんですが、武装勢力の人たちをバスクに連れて行ってですね、バスクの経験を学ぶという、そういうトレーニングをしました。で、まさに先ほどゴルカさんがおっしゃったように、その武装勢力の人たち、武装勢力と我々呼んでますが、もちろん政治運動をしている人たちですね。と、やはりこのゴルカさんたちのグループ、バスクの人たちの言葉が同じっていう話は、本当にその通りで、多くのことを学び、そして次につなげる一歩になったんじゃないかなと我々は思ってるんですが、そういう形で学び合うっていう、こういうことも我々サポートする。これもメディエーションサポートの一つの取り組みだということもお伝えしたいなと思います。で、これからタイ南部の話をちょっとしていただこうと思うんですが、当初、ジュララットさんに先にと思ってたんですが、チェナマユさんに先に話していただいた後に、ジュララットさんにお話ししていただこうと思うんですけれども、大丈夫でしょうか。それではよろしくお願いします。
Thank you for Akiko. I will try.
Tunggu sebentar. スライドお願いします。はい。
Yeah, thank you. I will try explain situation in Patani 5 minutes. I think is not enough for us because so long time, 20 years ago. The violent conflict in Patani is a self-determination conflict. The violence has erupted in 2004 and been prolonged until the present. There have been 7,000 deaths and 13,000 injury in the past 19 years. The Thai government has spent around 13 billion US dollar in attempting to resolve the conflict, mainly on security but also on development. But it has not been a successful approach. The community continues to experience oppression from the Thai government with special law enforcement in the region. Human rights violations are frequent, including torture. NGOs play a big role in addressing social needs, for instance, looking after orphans, providing support for widows, and legal aid. This creates a degree of trust in NGOs, and they have been able to start addressing more strategic issues in relation to the conflict. We become more strategic by creating the Civil Society Assembly for Peace, CAP, an umbrella organization established comprising 29 organizations and working on 8 issues: peace and politics, education, youth, women and children, culture, human rights and justice, health, and the environment. We learned it from the experience of Indonesia NGO that the Sasakawa Peace Foundation brought to us. Working in a more coordinated way enable us to be more strategic. And the role of CAT has increased to promote political safe and inclusive space, to support and promote the peace process and using peaceful means to achieve political goals. Working in conflict region against a strong state can be very isolating. The support of Sasakawa provides both solidarity and fresh perspective. Part of this has been to develop our capacity, for instance, through a training course that provide knowledge and understanding of human rights principles, special law, peace process, and humanitarian. Other efforts have been to help us protect our language. which is important for our identity and to provide a political space for affected women and women in general to be able to access information on the conflict situation and to listen to women's opinion on conflict resolution. The analysis and training help us to think about alternative options, and we know that promoting women engagement widen the conversation about what is possible. Supporting youth to engage has an impact on the reduction of violence, but it has not yet shaped new political alternative, and this is an area that need more work. We need to find political solution for Patani conflict, not violent way. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。なのでピースメディエーションっていうのはさっきのお話でトラック1トラック2は何だっていう話ですけれども、トップレベルの政治的なトークですね、和平対話をして解決するだけではなくて、本当にコミュニティレベルから理解を促し、そしていろいろな活動をする、これもピースメディエーションの活動の一つだということの紹介だと思います。ありがとうございました。ではジュララットさんで、ジュララットさんは本当に笹川平和財団、そしてバーゴフ財団とともにずっとバンコクの方なんですけれども、このタイ南部の問題について活動されている、我々インサイダーピースメディエーターという言い方をするんですけれどもの代表として今日は来ていただきました。よろしくお願いいたします。
So thank you, Akiko, and thank you for inviting both of us to be here. So actually, I'm not from Bangkok, but anyway, I'm from the upper south of Thailand, living in Bangkok, yes. So as Ayub said, I would like to focus on just one key theme of the deep south of Thailand right now. So talking about the political space in Pattani now has been closed for several years since the erupted violence in 2004. So people are not be able to communicate their preferences, organize political forum, act individually or collectively. Engaging with government going to have a lot of restrictions and harassment. So speaking of Pattani history, independence or just right to self-determination was prohibited and risks to be threatened by the government. So it limited Pattani people's ability to actively discuss on what they do want for their own future. So therefore, gradually widening spaces are extremely important. In the meantime, activists and young people also realize that using violence is not the only way for political struggles. So since 2010, with the support of the Berkhoff Foundation and Sasakawa Peace Foundation, so these two organizations as third parties from outside the countries, so there are a lot of several efforts to provide space and strengthening local people in Pattani. So I just want to give like some examples that Berkhoff and Sasakawa working together, have been worked together for a long time. For example, we create a platform called Insider Peace Builder Platform, IPP. So this platform actually created by the former director of the Berkhoff, Dr. Norbert Ropers. So this platform includes about 120 participants. So from various backgrounds, from in terms of the political ideology, they come from a very wide range of ideology. And they came together and talking about conflict. How do they analyze conflict together? So what do they think about the current situation, and also making some political statements, sometimes also create or make the recommendation to the parties. What do the people on the ground really need or really want? So this is just one example. So the IPP has been create a lot of political activist network until now. So many IPP members maybe not yet function right now, but they became their own network. So IPP is just a platform, learning platform for them. So the second activities, People's College was also created by a local political activist, young activist at that time, for educate and training on the relevant issues for young people. Because at that time, there are a significant group of young people highly motivated to learn about nonviolent strategies and trajectories to improve peace and justice in the region. So what happened after the People's College created or established? So there are many activists who are still active right now and still working on finding the peaceful solution for the Deep South. And the third one that I just want to mention briefly, so related to what we call track 1, peace dialogue. So when the government started the peace dialogue with Malaysian as a facilitator, so Sasakawa somehow behind the scene, we also helping the parties from both sides to work together, and when they got stuck or when they have some kind of cannot go beyond what they just discussed at the table. So that's also another thing that Sasakawa support. And the last one, maybe the last example, which is currently we are doing, both of us, we are now the member of the Parliament committee. So the government just, after the elected government, so as you know, Thailand, we are under the military for nearly 10 years. So just the year before, last year actually, we have a civilian government. So under the civilian government, the political landscape and political atmosphere has changed. So they allow us to have the ad hoc parliamentary committee on peace building process. So Mayu, he is also part of the committee, and I'm advisor to the committee. But they have limited budget. So with the support of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, so support us to do the working on the writing report. Why this report is important? Because of one of the role of the committee that we have to draft the recommendation, and this recommendation report will be submitted to the parliament to discuss. And when the parliament endorse this recommendation, will pass to the prime minister to make for his consideration and also sent to related agency. So this kind of the support, I would say that the support of the mediation is not just only at the track 1, but also what we're trying to do to support both at the local level and also connect local to the center or to the track 1. So peace mediation not just only at the negotiation table. So I would say that right now, Pattani, at least the political space at least is widening. We can talk about independence and right to self-determination, which never been ever speak in the parliament before. But right now, at least we can speak about this term in the Thai parliament. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。今、タイはですね、その先ほどお話にあったように、選挙の後、また新しいステージに変わってまして、で、どうやって本当にこのタイ南部の紛争を政治的に解決するか、これどれだけ、ポリティカルウィルという言い方しますけれども、タイの政治がコミットできるか、これがすごく重要なところになっているんですけれども、これをどれだけ引き出せるのかっていうことも非常に重要になってきてるんじゃないかなというふうに思っています。で、我々笹川平和財団ドナーでもありますけれども、我々ドアという言い方もしまして、もちろんお金って言いますか、資金的な支援というのもしますけれども、一緒にアカンパニーメントっていう言い方をしますけれども、共にですね、ずっと今、我々10年以上にわたって、共に活動している仲間として、今回は紹介していますけれども、ずっと現地に行き、また戻り、そしていろいろな紛争分析を共にし、そしていろいろなアクターと連携しながら、平和のためにどうやって一歩進めていけるのか、これをずっと続けているという形になります。 で、先ほどから今日お話にあったようにトラック1のまさにピーストークだけではないいろいろな支援っていうのがピースメディエーションサポートだということ。そして実はですね、ここをちょっと皆さん見ていただいて、ヨーロッパの方たち、そしてヨーロッパの団体実はすごく多いんですね。なんですけれども、我々としては日本も何かもう少しこのピースメディエーションサポートという分野にコミットできるんじゃないかということで、ぜひ皆さんに知っていただきたいっていうのが今回の講演会の趣旨ではあったんですけれども、ヨーロッパの方たち、そしてアメリカですね、多いんですけれども、今回はアフリカですとかラテンアメリカからもたくさんメディエーションサポートをしている団体、今回日本に来てくださっていますけれども、アジアの団体もいますので、今日はアジアの団体の方たちに一言ですね、どういう活動をしているのか、そして今日お話聞いた中でプラスアルファ何かアッドすることがあればお話ししていただけたらなと思うので、まずはカマルル・ザーマン先生ですね。日本でミンダナオの活動をされている方はすでによく知っている先生だということでかもしれませんけれども、今日はですね、その東南アジア紛争研究ネットワークという、先生の NGO ですね、の団体としてお話ししていただけたらなと思います。よろしくお願いします。
All right, thank you. Maybe I'll stand so that people can see who is the guy with the long hair. Thank you for inviting me over to this forum. My name is Kamarul Zaman Askanda. People call me Zam, and I'm from the Southeast Asian Conflict Studies Network. I'm Malaysian, but if you know that Malaysia has been involved in a number of peace facilitation processes in the Southeast Asian region, but I don't belong to the government. I do not work with the Malaysian facilitators working in the conflict areas of southern Philippines or in southern Thailand, but we do peace mediation support, and I think that's what Akiko was saying, that we do provide support, for the facilitation processes. And many things have been mentioned by the speakers. I don't want to take too much time, but I think one common sort of like theme, among all the speakers is that, we are always in the background. You don't see us. You don't see us working with the conflict actors in a formal process. You don't even see us, in the when they sign the agreement. Sometimes, we are in the background. Peace mediation support is to accompany, the conflict actors when they are working, in the peace processes, and sometimes coaching them, sometimes providing alternatives, sometimes introducing them to various other revolutionary movements, as Gorka mentioned, because we also do the same thing. We would invite various revolutionary movements from around the region and quietly, discuss, have a discussion, between themselves as to how they go about, managing, trying to resolve their own conflict situation. So we do these things, and we cannot do these things openly. It has to be in the background. We are like Cinderella working in the kitchen, and trying to make sure everything is okay, while the ugly sisters are out there getting all the attention. So we look at ourselves as, Cinderella working back there, doing something meaningful. And I told Akiko already, I cannot stop at 1 to 3 minutes. I'll take maybe 1, 2 more minutes because we are in Japan. And in the past, we actually have been working quite a lot, with JICA. I'm sure there are JICA people here. Hello, JICA people. We have been working a lot with JICA on the Mindanao peace process. Because Akiko mentioned earlier that, JICA and the Japanese, would only want to work when the conflict is over, but that's not true, because during the time, especially during Madam Sadako Ogata, when she was the late Madam Ogata, when she was president of JICA, she wanted to help, build peace while the conflict is ongoing, because they are investing a lot for peace. So we have to ensure that peace is not only sustained but achieved. So we did a lot of work building, consolidation, building relationships between the conflict actors, in the Mindanao conflict situation. Because Malaysia does the formal facilitation for the peace process. We do this in Kuala Lumpur, in Putrajaya. But many of the difficult issues, that were going to be discussed were not actually discussed in Kuala Lumpur or Putrajaya at that track 1 level, because through with JICA, we bring them over to Penang and we organize consolidation for peace programs and discussing these difficult issues and overcoming these challenges before it goes on to the formal process. So JICA was very much involved, for 10, 12 years, we were working with them. And then finally we had a big program here in Japan, in Hiroshima, sponsored by JICA, where we brought all the main actors to Hiroshima in 2014, including the president of the Philippines at that particular time, and the leader of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. We had discussion in Hiroshima before the comprehensive agreement for the Bangsa Moro in 2014. But a lot of these things, like I say, is in the background. People don't know that these things are happening, but they do happen. And I think, that's, to support, the comments made by the speakers that, we do peace mediation support. We do these things quietly. People don't know, they only eat the good food, but we, the Cinderellas, we are in the kitchen doing all the cookings. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。で、次にですね、G と我々は呼んでいますが、G シワさんで、カンボジアの団体なんですけれども、ミンダナオの出身のフィリピンの方です。で、CPCS というカンボジアにベースがある、特にミャンマーのことを頑張ってらっしゃる、活動してらっしゃる団体ですので、少しG からもコメントいただけたらなと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Thank you, Akiko. Another Cinderella in the story. But yes, thank you for inviting us and for giving us a bit of space to share some of the key learnings. I would talk, I think, a bit more on one of the things that we're learning in Myanmar. That's where I have been focusing my work for the last 8 years. And I think it's important to sort of, one, acknowledge that nowadays there are also contexts like Myanmar where when we're talking about mediation, we're not just talking about two parties, but there are multiple parties or multiple groups that are involved. And so that's one of the challenges that we've been facing, is that how do you then align different groups that you're working with to be able to really have, a sense of what's going to be, the bottom line. Because I think in our experience, one of the key questions that we always ask is, what is it that we are trying to achieve when we do mediation, right? Is it, part of it is, cessation of hostilities or having a ceasefire. But what we've been learning in our experience in Myanmar, and also reflecting in our case in the Bangsamoro, is that unless you change the system, which are, sometimes it's the constitution, sometimes the laws that really allows injustice and, all those things, allows the war to take place, then it's going to be really difficult to sustain a mediation intervention. So the bottom line is one of the things that we keep on sort of looking at and reflecting in our organization, and also, again, asking, what is it that we are working towards? The second thing about what we do, and I think in relation to what the speakers have also said, is really helping those groups that are fighting for self-determination, or those groups who are in opposition parties, to really prepare. Because when we're talking about peace agreements and conflict resolutions, we always think about the formal agreements. But actually, in reality, there are formal and informal processes. The informal process is one of the most important part, which is why the Cinderellas step in to really look into how then can you prepare these key actors to be able to really think about the substance, so that when there is a formal process, they are then able to talk about substance and not just talk about the big, things. And when we say substance, asking really them, for example, in Myanmar, when people talk about self-determination, what is your concept of self-determination? When they talk about federalism, what kind of federalism are you talking about? When they're talking about power sharing, we ask, what kind of power actually do you want to get? What kind of power sharing is your proposal? Because if there's one thing that we learned from the Philippine peace process, or for the Bangsamoro peace process, without preparations, a formal negotiations, has its own limits. And so it's important really for us to be able to really help prepare, those people who are fighting for self-determination to be able to really think through and articulate what is it that they wanted so that they're prepared in the formal negotiations. And I think that's where the third point that I want to talk about is what Senator Gorka have said about the transformation, right? Because conflict is, from our perspective, it's really dynamic. It doesn't end when the agreement is signed, right? And so there are thousands of things that needs to be done. But from our perspective, we need to be able to see the big picture. That means we need to constantly analyze what's happening, not just nationally, but also what are the geopolitical dynamics that are happening. The role of China, the role of US, the role of other superpowers in the region. Because I think for us to be able to create a more sound intervention, I think we need to be able to really think about what is the big picture and how is, a small contribution that we're doing can help the conflict system to change and transform. So thank you so much. I hope it helps.
ありがとうございます。このようにアジアにも他にもですね、ピースメディエーションサポートをしている団体があるよということで、2人からコメントをいただきました。ありがとうございます。残念ながら時間が来てしまったので、もうこの辺で終わりたいと思うんですけれども、ヨーロッパの国々だけを真似するというわけではないんですけれども、多くのヨーロッパの国々ではメディエーションユニットっていうのが外務省の中にあります。ただ日本にはそういうのがないんですね。なので今回も皆さん日本の外務省の人たちに会いたいということを言われてもカウンターパートがないということで、なかなか難しい思いをしました。で、先ほどのジョナさんの話にもあったように、武器の購入だ、様々なことあると思うんですけれども、それと同じだけじゃあ平和のためにもっと投資をしてもいいんじゃないかという話が多分あったと思うんですけれども、日本もっと多分平和のためにいろいろな活動できるんじゃないかなっていうふうに我々思っております。なのでぜひですね、このメディエーションサポートというそういう分野もあるんだということと、先ほどのプロフェッサーが言ってましたがシンデレラじゃないですけれども、この裏方としてですね、その和平対話のために働いているそういう人たちがたくさんいるんだということ、そして日本もこういう形で NGO ですね、ノンステイトアクターという話も出ましたけれども、と一緒に連携しながら世界の平和のため、それはひいては日本の平和と安定にももちろんつながるわけですから、そういった活動がもっともっと進んでいけるように、そして皆さんの多くの人のそれがサポートがないと多分続かないと思いますので、ぜひ関心を持っていただけたらなと思います。今日は、長い時間になりますがありがとうございました。まずはパネリストで来てくださった方たちに盛大な拍手でお礼を言いたいと思います。ありがとうございました。